Hello, everyone. Welcome. In today's live, we're going to be talking to Lisa Marchiano. So I believe she's going to be joining us in a few minutes. Before we begin, I would love to start introducing her. Lisa is the author of The Vital Spark, which is what we're going to be talking about, and then also of the book Motherhood. So here's Lisa. Let me invite her in. Let's see. Hi, Lisa. Welcome.
Hi, thanks.
Thank you so much for accepting this
Yeah,
invitation. I would love to introduce you to our community here. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with your work, so I'll just say a few words. So, Lisa is, as I was saying, the incredible author of these two books. Today, we're going to be talking about Vital Spark. She's also the author of Motherhood and is a Jungian analyst. She is a co-host at the podcast This Jungian Life, which is a huge success and hit. Um, and in The Vital Spark, the book we'll be talking about, she brings her deep understanding of the human psyche through fairy tales, myths, and stories. Lisa, it's such a pleasure and an honor to have you here. And I would love to start our conversation by asking you, how did you choose the stories you bring in your book? How is that process for you to connect with the stories and believe that they fit well, or how does that work?
Well, actually, the stories, most of them kind of picked me, I would say, for both books. I mean, I remember, when I was sort of gestating motherhood, I would read these fairy tales that had, like a mother-child relationship in them and be like, wow, that really speaks to something in me. And it's sort of like, wow, I feel like I could say a lot about that. I feel like I could really unpack that. The Vital Spark actually, it was sort of born out of a podcast episode, actually. We did this episode a number of years ago called Fierce Female Initiations. And in that episode, I was really surprised by how much energy I had for it. And I was just like, oh, there's this fairy tale, and there's this fairy tale, and there's this fairy tale. And we finished the episode, and I was like, oh my God, that's a book. So most of the fairy tales sort of were like ones that had been kind of living with me in that way. And then there were a few where I was like, okay, I know I want to talk about the trickster, for example, and I need to go find the right fairy tale for that. Or what were some other ones? The Pink Pearl Prince. I knew I wanted to talk about desire, and I kind of had to go looking for that one. But most of them sort of just that they actually drew me along toward writing the book.
That's such a wonderful process. You know, the stories we carry and we know we need to bring forth, and then also going the other way around,
Yeah.
the stories we need to find.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
for those who are not familiar, I would love if you could speak a little bit of what is the vital self. If you can just say a few words on this concept, on this energy.
Well, so the book is really about women's psychological development, and it's about the fact that for many women, not all, but for many women, what I call in the book kind of fiery qualities like shrewdness and aggression and ruthlessness and being disagreeable, that those qualities can be difficult to have a conscious relationship with. So again, I know some women for whom this is not a problem, but it certainly has been for me, to kind of get over having to be nice all the time or accommodating other people or really knowing what to do with my anger, like how to use my anger constructively. That is still a bit of a work in progress, but I think I've come a long way. So, but it was, it's definitely my personal experience, but it was also something that I noticed in the women that I was working with. It's like, oh, so this is not just me. So what I wind up saying is that there's qualities like kindness and attunement and nurturance that help us get and stay connected with each other. And then there are qualities like aggression and shrewdness and boldness that help us get and stay connected to ourselves And both sets of qualities are important for psychological health and growth and wholeness. But for some women, that second set comes a little harder, and that may be something that's partly innate. It certainly is affected by socialization. So it's sort of like how do you develop that conscious relationship with those attributes?
Absolutely. These 8 qualities, and I'll just repeat it here for everyone to know. The book is divided by chapters in each of these qualities. So we have shrewdness, disagreeableness, cunning, desire, sexuality, anger, authority, and
Yeah.
ruthlessness, right? I agree with you. Basically it's been exiled
Yes.
within a woman, right? And we need to recover those to encounter our vital self.
Hmm.
I am also very interested in the one on authority because I also feel that these 8 give you that, right? It's like it
Exactly.
gives you your
Exactly.
sovereignty.
Yeah,
And as
I
you,
mean, I think if you know what to do with your anger, if you're able to claim your shrewdness, if you're able to be disagreeable when you need to be, those are the kind of the building blocks to carrying authority, I think. And a lot of women, different ages, different walks of life, that is a question like, how do I carry authority? How do I hold authority? Whether it's with your spouse or your child or, certainly at work,
yeah,
you know?
absolutely. I love the way you described it as being one with yourself as well.
Hmm.
Um, I was wondering if we can go a little bit into one of the stories.
Sure.
Are you up for it?
Absolutely.
Uh, I was thinking we could go into the Leopard Woman or Melusina, just because they're shorter stories. Yeah.
Hmm.
Would
Yeah.
you like to tell them? Would you like me to tell?
Um, sure, I'm happy to tell him. So, The Leopard Woman is this wonderful story from Africa, and there's a man and a woman, and they're on a long journey. They're very tired. They don't have a lot of food. The woman's got her baby on her back, and it turns out she's a woman who can turn herself into anything. And so the husband, they come to this plane, and there are, animals on the plane, and he says, "Turn yourself into a leopard and go get us, go capture something for dinner." So she looks at him, she says, "You really want me to do that?" And so she puts the baby down, she unties the baby, puts the baby down, turns into a leopard, and is kind of snarling, and the baby's right there, and the husband gets so afraid he climbs the tree. The wife goes off and as a leopard and captures a nice heifer and brings it back. And the man won't come out of the tree until she turns back into a woman and puts her baby back on her back. And when she does so, she looks at him. She says, "Never ask me to do your work again." So,
I love this story so much.
mhm.
I read it like, oh my God, oh my God. I absolutely love it. I find that there's so many incredible symbols and motifs there for a woman. It reminds us of so much, right?
Mhm.
Even this putting the baby back on its back, like
Yep.
returning to that nurturing, calming,
Yep.
domestic
Yes.
self. And this
Yes.
very strong transformation and passage from leopard, wild hunter
Hmm.
into this domestic woman that has a baby, that has that gentleness, that
Hmm.
kindness. I
Hmm.
first love the ability that a woman can do and be both. I
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
that for women.
Yeah, and that it feels a little transgressive. It feels kind of frightening. It feels like, whoa, she could devour the baby. She could devour her husband.
Mm.
I have an online fairy tale group for women called Spinning Straw, and we're actually discussing this story right now. And women's anger a lot of us really struggle. The conversations in Spinning Straw around this are really fascinating because a lot of us really have a hard time with anger. And I think men maybe have their own issues with anger, but it's really different from ours. I think when we get angry, we can often feel so guilty, even just for being angry, even if we
Mm.
don't really do anything about it. But it's like, am I allowed to be angry? And this, in the fairy tale, her transformation into a leopard, like just the way that we can feel just overcome, like we're turned into someone else. But anger turns us into someone who's really in touch with her instincts. There's always something so authentic about anger.
Absolutely. And it feels even that her transformation, the moment, the way you describe it in the book, like the fur coming and everything, it's propelled by anger.
Yes.
No,
Yep.
it feels like
She's
because of her
guts.
power, she can transform from any emotion. But in this episode, it's, of this story, it's anger that is
Yeah.
kind of igniting that transformation.
Yes. And I do think that anger can do that, right? Like maybe more so than any other emotion. I mean, certainly times when I've gotten so angry, it's like, wow, who was that? And I kind of, you sort of lose it, and you're shouting, and maybe you're throwing things, and then a few minutes later it calms down and you're like, whoa, that's scary. I think oftentimes we feel a little afraid of our anger.
Yes, exactly. Because as you bring also in the book, especially on the chapter of ruthlessness, it can consume us,
Yes.
right? It can take over in a shadowy way, in a negative way, in a way that destroys, but not to create, right? The destruction. Um, I was also very puzzled about the ending phrase of that story: never asks a woman to do a man's work again. I
Mm-hmm.
want to talk about two things. I love the symbolism and the first interpretation you bring of this story as how in marriage
Yeah.
this occurs.
Yeah.
The couple is it's being pulled to their extremities. And I even have a little paragraph here from your book to read. May I?
Sure.
Okay. So this is on page 171 in case someone has the book and would like to follow with us. On the second paragraph, 170. This simple tale is full of evocative imagery that it illustrates the enormous power inherent in a woman's anger. This power has both a destructive and life-giving aspect, but once unleashed, it can be difficult to control. The tales begin with a couple undertaking a long journey together with their young child, but their reserves are depleted.
Mm-hmm.
There is no food. We might liken this to the stage of marriage in which there are young children and insufficient resources. Both partners work hard and there is little time of energy for enjoyment or relaxation. In such a state, both parents feel resentful. We can regress to a feeling of childlike entitlement that our partners should care for us. We might be looking for emotional tending affection or attention. Well, this is, for me, it was such an important story and an important way of interpreting as well, bringing into the marriage, not just looking within, but looking into our relationships as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you can, based on the Leopard Woman, give some thoughts on Leopard Woman and the marriage and
Mm-hmm.
boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and rage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's of course many different ways to interpret this, and a kind of purely psychological interpretation, we might imagine that she is an image of the man's anima, but looking at it more about what might it say about a woman's experience, I think it does image something that happens in marriage, and oftentimes, if I mean, oftentimes when there is a new baby, the husband feels very, left out, and can oftentimes be kind of needy and really want the wife's attention. And that is not what she needs at that time. She needs to be supported. And so it's this sense that, hey, she's doing everything. She's taking care of the baby, and now you want her to go catch dinner? That's your job. And of course, in our culture, it's kind of a regressive idea to think about a man's work and a woman's work, but I think that it still applies that, there is a kind of an economy of labor in any couple, especially in with children where, someone's got to do this so that someone else can do that. And if you're taking care of the baby, then yeah, he's got to be the one who takes out the garbage or whatever it is. And if that's not happening, then what do we do with the rage? And I actually think the leopard woman responds pretty creatively.
Mm.
She lets him know the power that she possesses, and that she's not going to put up with that again.
Thank you so much for bringing that and for just quickly mention there that um, the whole a man's job, a woman's job, and I understand that we are in times of looking for equality, right? We're looking for emancipation for women, so we
Hmm.
have that equality. But yes, and we need to have some clarity, some maturity to also know that there is a division of labor, and as you say in your book, most often the woman is kind of overwhelmed with it, with the emotional labor, with some of
Yeah,
the tasks around the house, the home, the family.
yeah. I mean, of course, couples these days divide work up in many different ways, and but it can. I remember reading when my kids were little. I read this great phrase. I have never forgotten it. That the author was talking about being a mother and how there's a Mobius strip of guilt and resentment, that you either feel resentful that your partner's not doing enough, or you feel guilty because you're not doing enough. And I was like, yes, But I think that when you have little kids, there's just too much work. It doesn't matter. There's too much work and not enough people to do it. But both people hopefully feel both resentful and guilt, and that probably means they're splitting things relatively equally. But you do sometimes find these experiences where one person or the other, and sometimes it's the man, feel pretty entitled, and I think to be compassionate or empathic for the way men feel. Oftentimes, when there's a small child, the wife's attention is so much taken away by the child that the man can feel kind of left out and become sort of demanding in response, and that can be pretty infuriating, even if we understand it and feel empathy for that situation.
Thank you so much for these thoughts and for bringing the story to your book. It feels sometimes for me working with stories and working with women and sharing these stories with women. Sometimes the stories we feel it gives us permission.
Yeah,
I think that's the beautiful thing about myths, fairy tales, folk tales. It reminds us that we are allowed to act in a certain way.
yeah.
So it reminds us that we are allowed to put that strong boundary there, to
Yep.
have an episode propelled by anger. So we have the energy to put that boundary. And I
Hmm.
love that in this story. Thank you.
And it also shows us that our concerns are really universal,
Hmm.
because here's a story from another world and another time, but it's something that I think probably many women can relate to.
Yes. Absolutely. I had the pleasure of hosting women from around the world. I lived in China before and worked mostly
Ah,
online. So I have women from all around the world joining courses in which I share stories and their symbolic interpretation. And it's incredible to see how women from different walks of life, different cultures, different countries, they connect.
yeah.
They all see themselves in that story. Um, I would love for us to also talk a little bit about Ms. Lena and
Melusina.
her Saturday.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I hope I can get this one right. You can fill me in if I miss anything. So there's a kind of a knight who has accidentally killed his companion, and he's sort of wondering what to do, and he meets this beautiful woman, and she kind of helps him, and goes back to her castle, and everything's great, and so they decide to get married. She says, yeah, I'll marry you, but you have to give me one day a week where you don't bother me.
Mhm.
And he said, sure, sure, no problem. So every Saturday, she's just, she's off on her own. He has no idea what she does. You can't ask me about it. It's my business. So no problem. But eventually, after many years of living together, I think it's like his brother, someone comes to visit and sort of says, what is she doing in there? You better check. So he peeks through the keyhole, and he sees that she's in the bath, but what's sticking out of the bath is a fishtail. So what she's been doing on her Saturdays, she's a water nixie basically. And 6 days of the week she lives in human form, but one day a week she turns into a mermaid and soaks in the tub. So and he thinks, oh no, this is going to ruin things, but it doesn't. It doesn't right away. Life goes on, but then he gets upset about something and he kind of curses her for her snake-like nature, and that's it. The relationship is over, and he never sees her again. Did I mostly get it right? That was sort of what.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Yes. I want to say just a few comments before we go a little bit deeper. First is what a wonderful arrangement. Now,
Oh
from the
God.
start, to have a Saturday for yourself in your relationship when we're talking about an outer relationship,
Hmm.
I thought that was already like, okay, that's smart
Yep.
to begin like this. But then, as you interpret the tale, you bring this very interesting thought about how it's important to have this time really for ourselves. And it's not about sharing our mermaid nature, our wildness,
Hmm.
our time that we delight ourselves in the bath, symbolically speaking, with the other. That is not necessarily. What are some of your thoughts? And the story actually you brought from one of your clients there really touched me as well.
Yeah, yeah. This woman who so generously shared her story about, she'd always kind of thought of herself as this, this very kind of artistic, soulful person who kind of couldn't be pinned down by a relationship. She wanted a sort of super soulful relationship. She didn't want anything that was kind of ordinary. And she started dating this guy that they got along great, but he's sort of like a steak and potatoes kind of guy. And she's like, how is this going to work? And then she had this incredible dream. And again, I'm doing it from memory, so I hope I can capture it. But that they were in a rowboat together, I think at night. And she dove into the water and she found she could breathe underwater. She has this incredible experience. And then she comes back to the surface and he's still there in the rowboat. So she can kind of come and go and do her deep dives into the mystery, but keep coming back to him. And that was I think, a part of her decision making process to kind of be with him, and that you can have you don't have to sacrifice your the mysterious places where you're in touch with your inner life to be in a relationship. And that tale is in the chapter on sexuality, because like maybe we need to have our own sort of emotional acre and our own that's just private, whether that has to do with our spirituality, our creativity, our sexuality. We don't have to share everything with our partner, and we don't have to be limited by the partnership either. We can have parts of ourselves that don't have to necessarily fit in the partnership.
Exactly. And in the relationship, right? That again, it's a very liberating story, I believe, for women because sometimes we're looking for the other and not necessarily only romantic relationships, but we're looking for the other to fit, understand, and participate in all
Yeah,
aspects of our life. And it's
right.
not really like that.
No, doesn't have to be
And
like that.
one of the elements and symbols in the beginning of the story. The knight is in the forest alone, I believe, in the dark, and he kills his friend by accident.
Hmm.
And she, I believe, witnesses everything and approaches him to help.
Hmm.
Um, and he immediately knows, as you say in the book, that there is, when she proposes, the Saturdays I will have for myself, and you cannot come and you cannot check and, do not follow me. He knows that there is a shadowy, a
Right.
mysterious, a deeper part of herself that is not just what's on the surface, right?
Yeah, that she can be in relation to darkness,
Mm.
and it's in the story, which of course, it's from the Middle Ages, it's a French story from the Middle Ages. So of course that was a very Christian time, and there is this kind of like moral overlay on it. but there's this sense that she's not all good and pure, right? I mean, she
Mhm.
was able to accept this dark thing that he did, even though it was by accident. And she had a dark part of herself, and then that also comes out too, because they have all these. I don't even know if I mentioned this in the book. I can't remember, but in the myth, they have a lot of children together, and their children are all extraordinary, but like somehow misshapen in some way. And I think the precipitating event is maybe like one of their kids kills another one. So there's this kind of thread of darkness that goes through. But she can be that way. She doesn't have to be good and pure. You know, she's not. She's very different, say, than the other ideal that would have been permeating the culture at the time of, say, the Virgin Mary. Like, here was a real image of feminine darkness that was also creative and generative.
Thank you for bringing this. And I resonate so much with it because in my own experience as a woman, and then also working with women, is that um, we are more alive, we are more in touch with ourselves, we are more vital, more dynamic, more creative, more joyful when we are in touch with these other qualities, when we nourish these qualities and we have them in our
Hmm.
repertoire. Doesn't mean we're right constantly being rageful, but we can bring
Right,
that.
right. Yeah, that's an important thing that's worth saying. Sometimes I talk about the book and people are like, well, you're saying that I should be ruthless? It's like, no, no, no. None of those qualities, it should be who you are. But sometimes I talk about it like it should be an arrow in your quiver. Because there are times when you might need to be ruthless. And it's like, well, what do you mean? The little example I give in the book is that I was an earlier time in my life, I was seeing a therapist, and it just wasn't working. It wasn't, it wasn't working. So I was like, okay, I need to let her know that this isn't working. I need to stop. And I was like, oh no, what do I, how do I do that? And will she be upset? And will I hurt her feelings? And, all of this kind of like caretaking therapist stuff that now, like sitting on the other side of the chair, I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like that's not your problem at all. But a lot of people feel that way, men and women, but maybe more so women. And when I was kind of twisting about this, I had this dream that I was driving in a car with Tony Soprano. And Tony Soprano is a guy who's going to do the hard thing, even if it's really ruthless. Like if he has to kill his friend because his friend has turned informer or turned informant, then Tony's going to do it. You know what I mean? So it was a little bit of almost a kind of comical way that my psyche was saying, like, you got to just go in and do the hit, just go in and say, listen, this isn't working. I'm not going to be working with you anymore. So that's what I mean by ruthlessness. What I think about it is doing something that might make someone else uncomfortable, but it's in service to growth.
Yeah,
It's not you're not being ruthless. You're not hurting someone to hurt someone. You're hurting someone in service to your own growth, or inconveniencing them, or not necessarily being emotionally brutal, but doing something that might you know feel uncomfortable to someone else.
absolutely. And it's really about shedding all that need to be nice all the time,
Right.
to be pleasing all the time,
Yes.
to do what's right for the other all the
Yes.
time, and standing up for oneself.
Right. Yes.
And I believe women need this more than men, at least from what I've seen. And I know that this is a
Sure.
very, my limited perspective of, but it seems like men are given more abilities to nourish these qualities,
Hmm.
and ability not only to nourish them, but to actually put them in action,
Oh yeah,
to practice them,
definitely, definitely.
because it's not enough to just have the arrow in your quiver. You need to know how to shoot it.
Yep.
And you need to have
Yep.
the courage to shoot it
Yep.
and the courage to stand the consequence
That's
of
right.
that.
That's right. That you might make someone uncomfortable. Someone might be mad at you. Someone, might end a relationship. But if it's something you need to do, then you need to be able to, like you said, to kind of tolerate the consequences of making someone else uncomfortable.
Um, So, talking about making someone else uncomfortable, shall we go into another story?
Sure.
Okay. I have so many here. I'm gonna decide. How about the Frog King? Also, I'm trying to select the smaller stories just so we can also retell it to
Right.
those who are here with
Right.
us.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great. I love this story so much. So there's a princess. She's a very beautiful princess, and she has a favorite plaything, which is a golden ball. And she likes to sit beside the well and play with her ball. And one day she's sitting beside the well and she's tossing it up in the air, which is a silly thing to do. And inevitably it falls into the well and she's crying. She's crying. She's lost her favorite plaything. And a frog comes to the surface of the water and says, "Oh, princess, why are you crying?" And she says, "I lost my golden ball." And he said, "Well, I can get it for you." And she said, "Oh, would you please? I'll give you anything." He said, "Yeah, I want you to take me back to the palace. I want you to let me eat off your plate. And I want you to let me sleep in your bed and for us to be really, really good friends." And she's like, "Oh, yes, 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 whatever you want." So he dives down, he gets the ball, he brings it back to her, it's in his mouth. She takes it from him. She's so delighted. She grabs the ball, she runs off to the palace, and the frog is like, "Princess." So that night she's eating dinner. She's sitting at the table with her father, the king, and she's eating dinner, and she hears squish, 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 and then someone knocks at the door. So she goes to answer the door, and the frog is like, "Hey, you forgot about me." So she slams the door. She comes back. Her dad's like, "What was that?" So she explains it to him, and he says, "You've got to keep your word." So there's another knock at the door. She goes back and she's like, she picks up the frog with two fingers. She's like totally disgusted. She places him on the table. He's like, "Move your golden plate a little closer to me. I want to be able to eat off your plate." So she does, and the frog eats off her plate. She's just really disgusted. And he's like, "I'm tired now. Take me to your bedroom." So she takes him to the bedroom. He's like, "I want to sit on your silken pillow." And she's so disgusted by him that she takes him and she flings him as hard as she can at the wall. And when he hits the wall, he turns into a handsome prince. And there's a little more to the story, but I think that that's probably good for our purposes. So, the comical thing is the French version, she kisses him. The German version, she throws him against the wall. But it's such a great, I mean, it's actually a very deep story, and there's many different levels to it. But for our purposes, I think one of the key things is that she's trying to play by the rules. She's doing what her dad tells her to do, um, but it's when she kind of responds to this primal disgust that she's very, very authentic. And then she's not nice. She's not doing the nice thing. It's like when we're too hampered by having to feel, like we have to be nice. We pretend, we fake it, we act like we like something that we really hate. And so that moment that we kind of give ourselves permission to be like, "No, this is not to my liking, and I'm putting my foot down." It's really a moment of transformation.
I absolutely love the story. And exactly as you said, it's about, well, I think it takes a lot of maturity for a woman to be able to say
Yeah,
that, and know what she is
yeah,
saying as well. To be like, I know myself enough that I can tell you I don't like this. I
right.
don't want this. I refuse this in my life.
Hmm.
This relationship, this practice, whatever it is. Um, so I love that authentic answer of throwing it at the wall and that transforming into Prince. He needed, as you say in the book, he needed an authentic, real
Yes,
response from
yes,
her, the curse could be broken,
yep.
right? He
Hmm.
needed he needed for her to be shown in her full spectrum
Yes,
for the curse to be broken.
right.
Now I wonder, as you mentioned, the kiss, if she was so disgusted, how would the kiss break the spell if it's not showing actually that authenticity?
Hmm. It's interesting because I don't know much about that French version. I should look into it. But a lot of times, what happened with these tales is they became a little more literary and they have this kind of over, like some of these tales are thousands of years old. They're older. The folklorists who've done the research, these tales turned out to be older than we even thought. And but you can kind of tell when they've been sort of made a little bit more literary and a little bit more appealing. And my hypothesis, and I don't know this for sure, is that the French version, they found it kind of shocking that she hurled him against the wall. And as a result, they kind of made it a little more appealing. It's like let's like make her kiss the frog. But I don't think it's just well. I'm I'm sure I could work with it psychologically, like having to accept something that you've rejected. That would be an interesting take. But it's a very different story if she has to kiss him to break the curse. Because, like
Absolutely.
you said so well, it was her authenticity that broke the curse, that broke the spell, that allowed for the transformation. I'm just going to turn on the light because the sun's going down and it's dark here. Okay.
And as you were saying, it would be a very different story. And perhaps because sometimes, at least I find this still, people see stories in a very literal way and they're not very much attuned to the symbolic understanding of it. It,
Right,
with the kissing of the frog, it maybe teaches women, to instead of stepping up for themselves, to
right,
succumb
right,
and hope for the best.
right, right. Yeah. I mean, that'll have to be for another book where I deal with the French version.
Yes. Let's go to the beginning of the story then. When you talk about she throwing the golden ball there, what a beautiful symbol. First of the ball, now of her connection to life itself, to that sparkle. And then next to the well, which just enriching the image of the subconscious, of diving deeper.
Right.
I study mythology with Martin Shaw,
Mhm.
and he talks about the bottom of the well having the most fertile muck,
Mhm.
and it's there where the most profound work can be done. So
Yeah.
the ball falling in the well, it's very symbolic.
Very, very symbolic. So, I mean, if you think about a golden ball, that's an image of, that's kind of a self image if you think, in kind of Jungian terms, the self with a capital S. And it's interesting that the princess kind of has this relationship with the self, but she takes it kind of lightly. It's a plaything. She doesn't understand what it is. And then when it falls in the bottom of the well and she misses it, and of course, like you're saying, the well is so important. The well is a place of contact with the source, with a contact with the sort of the living water within. So it's this is where the story is so deep. And then of course the frog is this image of a part of the psyche that can travel between the realms because it can come up and be on land. I love frogs, and it can go down into the depths. But she has some relationship with the self, but she doesn't really understand it, and she kind of takes it for granted. But the frog is the one, who can kind of introduce her to her depths, who can initiate her to her depths. And I think that's kind of what the story is about in a purely sort of psychological sense. But it requires that she get out of this like trap of niceness.
Yes. And also, it's like that transgression, right? As you said, it was very naive of her to be playing with her ball next to
Yep,
the well, but it's
yep.
almost like her deeper self knew the ball needed to fall there. She needed to have that incident to begin her life.
Hmm. Yeah, and I noticed someone in the chat's asking for more about frogs. So I'll just say, one of the amazing things about them is that obviously they go through a metamorphosis. So they start off as these tiny little tadpoles, and then eventually they turn into frogs. It's really a remarkable process to watch. And then, they can kind of move between the realms. And the other thing about frogs that I think is relevant, at least I think so, is they're really in this such charming way. They're a little anthropomorphic. They look like little men, and that's why if you ever read the book the books Frog and Toad by Arnold Lobel, and he's got Frog and Toad kind of dressed in these cute little outfits, but they do look, they have a lot of personality, and it's easy to sort of project something onto them because they do look like funny looking little old men. So
They are a wonderful symbol now, especially with this transition from the water to the land. I find that
mhm.
very powerful as
Yep.
well. Would you be willing to talk a little bit about the figure of the father in this,
Yeah.
and how it looks like the inner father, the dualism between the importance of order,
Yeah.
keeping your word,
Yes.
setting that structure in life, and also transgressing it for
Yes.
life to
Yes.
begin, for things to happen,
Yes.
and where
Yeah.
disagreeableness comes in, right?
Right, right. I mean, it's such a great story for that because, the king in fairy tales, and this is just kind of straight young, well, it's Marie Louise von Franz really, but it's the king often represents a kind of dominant attitude, right? The dominant attitude in the psyche or even in the culture. So this is a king who's very fair. He says to her, you have to keep your word. That is a good precept to live by. Is, you promise to do something, you should do it. And of course, if she hadn't answered the door, she never would have had the initiation. So I think it's really important to sort of have that sense of responsibility, because if you're always just skirting responsibility, then you never have that confrontation. But at the same time, there's a way that always doing what we're supposed to do can eventually feel really inauthentic. And so, she had to obey him, and then, as you point out, she had to transgress, and she had to disobey him and not be nice. So it's a wonderful little paradox, and I think that fairy tales are wonderful because they usually are kind of paradoxical like that. But sort of both are important. It was important that she follow her father's advice and keep her word. But then it was also really important that at the right moment, she knew, just instinctively knew when to transgress.
That's exactly as you mentioned, the power of stories. No, it problematizes behavior rather than tells you what to do. It
Yeah.
gives you there a framework to reflect on. It doesn't tell you the right thing to do is exactly
Hmm.
this, but it just gives you some images, some ideas to travel through. Um, I was wondering if there is anyone on the chat that would like to post a question for Lisa, as we only have around 15 more minutes. If you do, feel free to bring your question. Lisa, for us to start closing our chat, I was just wondering if there is anything that you in the beginning you spoke about you carrying a lot of these stories. You chose these stories for your book because they are alive
Hmm.
within you. And I wonder, out of curiosity, if there is one specific story, one specific quality from the 8 qualities you bring that you are focused on right now, working
Hmm.
in your own personal life,
Hmm.
if I'm allowed to
Hmm.
ask that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I mean, there's some stories that I liked when I picked them, and then when I worked with them, I just loved them. And the story of Sir Gawain is one of those.
Mm.
Like the more I worked with that story, the more I was like, oh my God, this is so great. I love this story. God, it's so great. But probably the fairy tale, like my fairy tale, is actually Vasalisa the Beautiful,
Mm.
which is just, oh my God, that story is just so deep. There's just so many layers to that story, and I, it's interesting because I don't know. I first heard it when I was pretty young. I don't remember how or why, but I remember hearing it. And Vasilisa the Beautiful is a Russian fairy tale, and it features Baba Yaga. And Baba Yaga, if you don't know her, she's so wonderful. She is this fearsome, really kind of sort of a nature goddess in Slavic folklore. But she has these kind of wonderfully, and she's just wonderfully creepy. She lives on a house that's up on chicken legs and can kind of walk around. Her house is surrounded by this fence that's made out of human bones, and there's a skull on the top of every fence post. And as the sun sets, the eyes start to glow. And she moves herself around in a mortar and pestle, which is just the weirdest way. I remember as a kid being like, what? But of course, it has super deep kind of mythological references, you know. Vasalisa, it's a little bit of a Cinderella setup. But her mother dies, her father remarries. She has a terrible stepmother and stepsisters, and she's sent to Baba Yaga's to fetch a light. But really, her stepmother and stepsisters are assuming that she will be killed and eaten by Baba Yaga, because that's what Baba Yaga does. But Vasilisa has this magical doll that was given to her by her mother on her mother's deathbed, that's very protective and helps her. She stays and she works for Baba Yaga for a number of days, and then Baba Yaga gives her the light and says, um, take this home. Don't, make sure you give this to your stepmother. So she's got one of those skulls on a stick, and there's these wonderful illustrations from Russian illustrations by Bilibin of Vasilisa going through the forest with this. Uh, um, uh, Sorry, I had like a video of
Skull. The skull on the
skull,
top
right?
of it. Yeah.
So she gets to her house by the morning, and she's like, "Oh, they probably don't need it anymore." She's about to toss the skull in the bushes, and the skull says, "No, no, no, no. Baba Yaga said, bring me inside." So she does, and the skull's eyes light up and burn her stepmother and stepsisters to death. And it's so interesting because I could go on and on and on about the story, but the similarities between that story and the ancient myth of a Nana and a Rushkigal,
Mm.
it's stunning, right? Because both of them show this descent, and I don't want to bore everyone by retelling Inanna and Ereshkigal, but it's a Mesopotamian myth where Inanna is this kind of beautiful, sort of like an Aphrodite figure a little bit. She goes down to visit her sister in the underworld, Ereshkigal, who's this kind of very fearsome creature, a little bit like Baba Yaga, and she's killed when she's down there. But then she's brought back to life, and when she returns to the upper world, she has the eyes of death, where she can kill people by looking at them. So it's this kind of innocent, winsome, beautiful, kind, you know, woman, girl, maiden who is initiated into her fearsome depths by the ancient mother goddess. That's what Baba Yaga is. The kind of the negative pole of the archetype, if you want to call it that, although Baba Yaga is so wonderfully complex that she's not all negative.
Mm.
And in so doing, she learns to harness her aggression. So anyway, that's a very powerful myth for me.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that. I also love the story of Vasalisa, and I love that you actually brought it in your chapter on
Yeah,
ruthlessness. Because Vasalisa, as you said, the story has so many layers
yeah.
that we could focus on something else, right? Um, One of the key elements there as well is the doll, is that connection to intuition. And what I loved was seeing intuition connected to that ruthlessness.
Mm-hmm.
Intuition as a guide, as a voice that allows you to step into your
Yeah.
aggression. And would you like to say a little bit about intuition and aggression and their connection? Because sometimes we see for example, the 8 qualities you bring, or if I don't love place them like this, but to see that niceness qualities, caring, gentleness, nourishing, nurturing, self-caring, and then aggression, shrewdness, ruthlessness, all of that on the other side, is to see them in connection,
Yeah.
to see them together integrated.
Well, there's a parallel parallel in the story. Her mother gives her this doll. The thing that's magical about the doll is that her mother says, when you're suffering, when something's going wrong, give the doll something to eat and something to drink and tell it your troubles. And then the doll comes to life, and the doll both comforts Vasalisa, but also will like do her chores for her. So that's how she's able to survive. But the thing about Vasilisa, she's really sort of the example of a person who's had a too good mother. I think Clarissa Pinkola Estes also talks about that, because she also talks about that fairy tale. But the thing is, if we've had a good mother, a mother who loves us, if we've had sort of pretty good parents, like that's a great thing, and it kind of gives us a foundation to be in the world. But it doesn't teach us that the world can be a kind of brutal place sometimes, and you've got to find your ruthlessness. Like we may not learn that if we have a kind of a too good mother in a way. So then she has to go and be with a very different kind of mother. Baba Yaga is kind of the again the negative pole of the archetypal mother. And she kind of nourishes Vasilisa in a very different way. She also gives Vasilisa something. She gives her the skull. So you can see the skull and the doll as counterparts,
Mm.
right? The doll is, kind of again, kind of helps her kind of stay connected, to herself and that kind of thing. But this skull helps her find her aggression, which is not something the doll could give her. So she didn't get that from her mother. She had to kind of become an apprentice to the crone in order to find her aggression and
I,
ruthlessness.
I love that. Thank you for putting it in this way, Lisa. Just this idea of having these two very important gifts, equally important,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And even in, I think, maybe women's development, communities, conversations, sometimes there is a very strong conversation around developing intuition, and developing aggression is underlooked.
Yeah.
So your book, also for those who are arriving, or as a reminder, it's a very beautiful invitation into stepping into the qualities that have been exiled. It has been
Hmm.
exiled because of society not allowing women to step into it, the way we are raised, the way we want to be seen as well. And it's an invitation for us to reclaim that
Hmm.
fearlessness sense of self.
Hmm. Yeah.
For us to close, I would love for you to share a little bit more about your work and how women who are connecting here, watching this conversation, can join you. Perhaps you mentioned earlier your group.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to find me. I would say that if you are a woman and you love fairy tales, or you want to explore using fairy tales to learn more about yourself, then consider joining us in Spinning Straw. It's a women's fairy tale community. It's spinningstraw.com, and we also have an Instagram account. And let's see, we have a different tale every month, and then I post prompts, and it's a lovely, lovely community, just full of some of the wisest women. I mean, the quality of the discourse over there is just so great. And then at the end of the month, we always have a live, which is a lot of fun. So you can check that out. I also have a podcast. It's called This Jungian Life, and that website is thisjungianlife.com. We're also on Instagram. I have the two books. My author website is lisamarchiano.com. And you can also read more about Spinning Straw there, and also about the women's retreats that I run. So I've been running fairy tale retreats, fairy tale and yoga retreats, and I do have one scheduled actually for next June. It will be in Tuscany. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, registration's not open yet, but it probably will be in the next month or so. And if you want to hear about when registration opens, you can head over to my website, lisamarchiano.com, and just sign up for my mailing list. I promise we don't send a lot of email. And the final thing I'll mention is that I have another book coming out in November. It was a book written by myself, Deb, and Joseph from the podcast. and it's a book on dream interpretation. So it's already available for pre-order, and it is called Dreamwise. So check that out if you love dreams, because I'm super excited about that book.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing all of that. That's so exciting.
Yeah,
And what a wonderful array of offerings as well for people to engage in different ways. I'll make sure to add all these details, websites, links
great,
on the description here. And I'll have this conversation also available on YouTube and here on Instagram.
great.
I would love to thank you so much for accepting this invitation, for joining me for this full hour here. I have learned so much through your books. It's been a great honor.
Oh,
Thank
thank you.
you.
Thank you for inviting me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us.